It's all you, buddy. So here we go. Joe Hernandez, this is going to be so awesome. He's an international authority on high value negotiation skills and techniques. He's a professional negotiator and coach. He assists CEOs, senior executives, sales professionals, and buyers in preparing for their most important deals. So let's virtually put our hands together for Joe Hernandez. There you go, Joe.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can see the presentation material. And hopefully you can all see that. And if you haven't already put it in side-by-side mode in your view, that'll absolutely help you to be able to see the entire presentation slide without anything in the way. So what I'd like to do is to start off by asking you to consider just how incredibly important it is that a business person know how to negotiate. I would argue that there's no other skill that has a more profound impact on your success. If you think about it for a minute, where does revenue come from? Where does growth come from? Where does a great compensation package come from? Or a great client agreement, or an acquisition, or a divestiture? Where do those deals come from? They come from negotiating agreements. And I would argue that it is the most important part of the deal-making process, hands down. Unfortunately, most people get this wrong. And I want to share with you some very interesting statistics that I would consider to be alarming, that my team and I continually do research to make sure we're at the cutting edge of this science of negotiation. And we do believe it is a science and not some mystical art. So what I'm going to share with you today is a more scientific approach to negotiations. And it would stand to reason that if it's a science, then there should be some principles that you could follow to determine your outcome. And there are. And there should be some tools that you can count on to consistently work for you. And there are. And there should be a way to measure how well you're doing during the process. Because what you can measure, you can manage. And there is a way to measure these things. I'm going to share some of those things with you today. But first, here's some of the statistics that we've picked up recently in our research. And we talked to academics at Northwestern University in Chicago, the program on negotiation at Harvard, MIT, and Stanford, and the Objective Management Group. And here are some of the alarming negotiation statistics I want to share with you. This one's crazy. 96% of negotiators leave money on the table. 96%. Here's the worst part. They don't even know it. And here's an interesting one. 1 in 5 deals ends up where both parties are worse off by doing their deal than by not doing their deal. 20%. This one's also interesting. Even when the parties that are in the middle of a negotiation, even when they have a great value generating opportunity sitting right there in front of them, they fail to recognize it 50% of the time. Now, this doesn't surprise me, because when most people show up at the negotiating table, how do they show up? Well, they show up guarded, right? They're very tight-lipped. They don't want to share information. They don't want to show their cards because they feel like it's going to put them at a disadvantage. So we don't communicate as much. We're not as transparent as we could be. And as a result, we completely miss these massive opportunities that are sitting right there in front of us. And it happens, as you can see, quite a bit of the time. But this next statistic is the one that really worries me, and it'll probably worry you too. This group called the Objective Management Group studied 2 million sales professionals in all different industries. And what they found was, as they were studying their abilities, skills, and processes, what they found was that only 13% of sales professionals had any kind of negotiating competency at all. And even then, it wasn't anywhere near mastery. And these are the people that we entrust our revenue generation to, our deal making, our profits, our margins, our growth. And yet most of them don't know how to do this. Here's the bottom line. Companies are missing out on revenue and profit and growth if they don't build a competency in negotiating skills. And it's just one of the most, I think, obvious ways to get growth in a business. Now, I've just allowed for a poll question to be asked. So if we want to tee up the first poll question, we'll go ahead and do that. And we'll give you just a couple of seconds to do that. All right, and thank you for answering that poll question. And speaking of questions, here's an interesting one. What are the biggest negotiation challenges that negotiators face today? And as we work with clients day in and day out, and we've been doing this for about 17 years, here's what we found are the biggest challenges that negotiators are facing, in particular in recent times. And here's the biggest one: fear of losing the deal. This is causing so much difficulty, anxiety, and actually miscues and mistakes when in the negotiation process. There is so much fear about, if I'm too aggressive, I'm going to scare them away. If I push back at all, if I ask for something as a concession, I might lose the deal. I need to have the deal. And so this fear of losing the deal causes people to be much more timid. They make more concessions than they normally should, and acquiesce way too quickly. So this is a major issue. And the way that we overcome this fear is essentially being prepared. And we'll talk a lot about how to best prepare for your negotiation as we go through this session. The other one that we hear often is, I feel like I'm always stuck in a price-only negotiation. And what I mean by that is, even though I'm bringing some unique value, some distinctive competency, maybe even a better return on investment, for some reason that gets pushed aside, and it's all about what's your best price. And the best way to avoid a price-only negotiation is to make sure that you're negotiating multiple deal elements and not just price. So you package your deal elements together. And the second thing is, make sure that the parties actually want to do a deal before you start negotiating how you're going to do business together. In other words, make sure the selling is done before the negotiation begins. Because if you start negotiating before that selling is done, then you're still just a commodity. And if you're just a commodity, the only way they have to differentiate you with everyone else is price only. It's just basic economics. So that's how we avoid price only negotiations. One of the other big problems, giving away too much in the negotiation. The problem here is just not having a solid concession strategy. And what we found is that most negotiators have absolutely no plan as to how they're going to deal with concessions when they come up, which is pretty scary because you know the other party is going to ask you to make concessions. So having a plan on how concessions are going to go down is critical. And that plan needs to be established before you sit down at the negotiating table. This is another difficulty. You see, what we found is that most people in an organization feel like it's expected of them to be competent in this area of negotiation. As a matter of fact, we've polled probably 1,500 CEOs, and we've asked them, how important to you is it that your people are competent negotiators? Like on a scale of 1 to 10. 1, not important, 10, very important. And it actually came in at 8 and above, which is telling. CEOs expect their people to be competent negotiators, period. So if you're one of those people negotiating the deal, you're going to be reluctant to ask for help because it may signal that you are not competent in this area. And all I have to tell you is this is a big mistake, because negotiations are hard. This is tough stuff. And not a lot of people have been trained in how to do it. And so just like any other professional, like an athlete or a musician or a business person, we need coaches and we need help to continually improve, to be at the top of our game. So don't make the mistake of not asking for help. Ask for help, because it's how you're going to get better and mastering this particular skill. Often we hear that people have no proven process that they can depend on that consistently works. And that's a problem. And that's something I want to try to arm you with in this very short time today, is the start of what the negotiation preparation process looks like that you can depend on consistently. So we'll try to tackle some of that today. One of the other challenges is feeling as though you have less power and leverage than the other party. And how in the heck can we shift power from the other party back to you? We're going to talk about power and leverage today, how to determine what your power and leverage is in a negotiation by doing what we call a power analysis. And then what do you do if you find your power's a little low? So we'll talk about that. Overall, these things just drive what is another major challenge, and that is just a lack of confidence in the entire negotiation process. If you start stacking up fear of losing the deal, giving away too much, reluctance to ask for help, my goodness, we're going to have a lack of confidence. And it's kind of like when you go into an exam. If you haven't studied, you don't know the material, you haven't even cracked the book, you show up to take the exam and you look at the first few questions and you're going, oh my gosh, this is going to be a disaster. But how different is it if you've studied, if you've read all the material, if you've done the practice quizzes and you're ready and you sit down and you open that exam and you know you're going to nail it? That's how I want to shift the way negotiators feel when they're going into a negotiation. I want them to feel like they're going to nail it. And it's by having a process and some very powerful tools. So here is one of the most important questions we need to answer before we go into any negotiation, because the answer to this question has a significant impact on whether or not you're going to get a great outcome or not. And here is that question: who should make the first offer? Now, most of the time when I ask this question, the response that I get is, let the other party go first. And I hear a lot of different reasons why that is the case. Some have told me, well, the reason you want them to go first is because you want to get some information from them. The more information you get, the better you are and the better advantage you might have in the negotiation. Some have said, I don't want to make the first offer because if I make the first offer and I'm too low, I've left a bunch of money on the table. If I make the first offer and I'm too high, I might scare the other party away. So enter fear of losing the deal once again. And for any of you who've ever been through sales training, and I have been a sales professional for many, many years. I sold for IBM, Xerox, telecom companies, high-tech industries. And I've been through an enormous amount of sales training. And one of the things that they continually teach, even today, is that you need to ask the prospect this question: what's your budget? And the reason we need to ask what their budget is because from a sales training perspective, it helps you qualify the opportunity. Is there really something there? And then understand how much they have to spend so you know how to scope the opportunity. And so those are all the reasons that we hear, or some of the reasons we hear as to why many would feel like you want the other party to go first. But then there are some that believe that maybe you should go first because you can set the tone for the negotiation. The bottom line is we could probably debate this for some time about who should make the first offer, but I'm going to give you the definitive answer here because there is an answer. And as I mentioned, the answer to this question is a major determining factor in whether or not you're going to get a great outcome. And the answer to this question lies deep in psychology. Psychology that's been at work in every negotiation you've ever been in or will be in. And here's that psychology after the poll question. So let's tee up the next poll. Oh, sunshiny mood today, huh? All right. Well, I'm just going to move on here. All right. Remember, I mentioned that the answer to the question lies deep in psychology about who should make the first offer. And here is that psychology. It's called the anchor rule, and it's tied to a phenomenon called anchoring. And here's what the anchor rule states. A number that a person sees or hears prior to making a guess influences that guess. This is fascinating. A number that a person sees and hears before making a guess influences that guess. What does that have to do with negotiating? Well, negotiating is all about guessing. What's the other party going to be like? Are they going to be collaborative or are they going to be competitive? How long is this going to take? How much are they going to ask of me in concessions? How much am I going to be willing to give? Will I be able to get anything in exchange? Heck, am I going to end up with a good deal or a bad deal? Negotiating is so much about guessing that it is extremely susceptible to this anchor rule. But there's something else that's very interesting about this anchor phenomenon. It's being studied by the top economists of our day. As a matter of fact, the leading behavioral economist of our day and Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman, who wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, puts a whole section of this big book around this anchor phenomenon and all the research that he's been doing around it. Why is the leading economist of our day spending so much time around this anchor phenomenon? Well, here's what we found out. Anchoring impacts us as individuals in every kind of economic environment that we're going to experience in our lives. Our personal economics, our business economics, our country's economics, and global economics. It has an impact all the way through, which is why I want to deep dive on it just a little bit so that I can show you what this anchor rule actually does to us as human beings. So here's an experiment that was done by a couple of psychologists that were diving deep into this anchor phenomenon. And as you can imagine, this is pre-COVID. And they did the research. I want you to imagine you're on Broadway going into the theater to watch a wonderful performance. And as you walk into the theater, the psychologists ask you to pick up a little square of paper, kind of just like this, and write down the last two digits of your social security number on that piece of paper. And so you take the piece of paper, write down the last two digits of your social, and then on your way to the seats, they're asking you to participate in a silent auction for a wireless mouse, computer mouse. And it looks something like this. And what they ask you to do is take the piece of paper that had the last two digits of your social on it, turn it over, and write down your bid for the mouse, and then slip it in the box. Do you know that those that had the higher number for the last two digits of their social bid up to 300% higher for the mouse than those that had the lower number? Here again, a number that a person sees or hears prior to making a guess influences that guess. And there is experiment after experiment that shows how our human mind falls for this anchor phenomenon consistently. But let me show you how this works in a negotiating scenario. So I want you to assume this is a sales professional who's been working with a potential client now for some time. She's done her due diligence. She understands the scope of the opportunity and believes that if she were to win this would be about an $80,000 opportunity. So she puts that in her Salesforce.com or whatever CRM tool they're using. And now it's baked in the forecast. But then this sales professional goes and asks the question that they were trained to ask in formal sales training. And the question is, what's your budget for this project? And the potential client answers with $50,000. Now, if you're wondering what the sales professional is thinking right now, and there's probably a number of things that you might have going through your head. First of all, they're saying, oh, shoot, That's not what I was planning on. But then what happens is, and what our research is showing us, is that the sales professional actually begins to try to figure out how to fit in to the $50,000 number. They begin to rescope what they thought was the true scope of work. They start looking for places to cut cost or margins. They bend and squeeze to try to fit into this $50,000 number. This is a horrible way to do business. And here's the worst part. Do you think when you ask somebody for their budget that they're going to give you the real number? Absolutely not. You can probably think of a number of times when somebody's asked you to give them your budget and you haven't given them the real number. And this is exactly what happens in negotiations of any kind, whether they be professional, business, or personal. So when you ask somebody for their budget, they're going to give you some arbitrary, fictitious number. Yet because of anchoring, we begin to bend and squeeze and contort to fit into this arbitrary, fictitious number, and that's double horrible. This alone kills growth. It destroys margins. I've seen it even destroy a company. This phenomenon alone. So, if you haven't figured out who should make the first offer yet, this bit of data will probably get you there. And this research that I'm about to show you, this data I'm about to show you, was based on research done by Northwestern University in Chicago, where they had hundreds of negotiators in live negotiations that they were studying. And what they found was a very profound, visible trend. And here was the trend that they saw. The opening offer correlates 0.85 with the outcome of the deal. If 1.0 is a perfect correlation, 0.85 is pretty close to a perfect correlation. So what this is telling us is that the first offer drives the outcome of the deal. This is big information to have. And when I first learned this, I had to go test it because I'm a skeptic. So I went out and tested it. My team and I, we negotiate deals all the time. We're assisting clients negotiating high stakes deals consistently. So we started testing this. And it was indeed the case. The first offer consistently drove the outcome of the deal. And since then, researchers have even come up with the feeling that this is a negotiating law of nature. And I agree with them, because in just every deal we have done, this has been the case. The first offer drives the outcome of the negotiation. So if you're wondering who should make the first offer, hopefully you've already figured it out. The answer is you. You need to make the first offer. Does it matter if you're the buyer or the seller? No. Does it matter if you're the hiring manager or the candidate? No. Whoever you are, you need to make the first offer so that you drive the outcome in your favor, because if you don't, you will be anchored by some arbitrary, fictitious number, and you're toast. Your deal has just been called for you. And I do not want that to happen to you. Now, I've turned the world a little bit this way for some of us who have believed that maybe you should let the other party go first, because we still believe in the old saying, the person who speaks first loses, which means it's another cultural thing we have to overcome. But I beg you to try this. It is absolutely phenomenal how much you can depend on the anchor phenomenon to help you drive deals in the direction that you want them to go. And here's another really powerful thing about anchoring. When you anchor somebody, they don't even know they've been anchored. That's powerful, to have a tool that consistently works and the other party doesn't even know that they're using it. As a matter of fact, they're probably waiting for you to speak first anyway. So they're giving you a wonderful gift, and you should seize the gift to anchor. And I have this really cool little experiment that these psychologists did that I think you'll get a kick out of that illustrates this. So they went into a very large number of grocery stores. And in each one of the grocery stores, they set up a soup display at the end of one of the aisles. And what I mean by soup display is just cans of soup. And what they wanted to measure was how many cans of soup a shopper will pick up on their average shopping trip. And it turns out it's 2 cans. Not surprising. But then they went back into all those supermarkets and they changed up the soup display by putting a sign above it in every one of those locations. And the sign said, no more than 12 cans per family. Do you know what the average buy became? 8. 4 times what they would normally buy. And when you chase those people to the checkout stand and you say, hey, why did you buy 8 cans of soup? And they say, I don't know. I thought I was getting a deal. No. These poor people had no idea why they were pushing a cart out of the grocery store with 8 cans of soup. But we know they were anchored. Thank you very much, Costco. You ever shop there? Listen, Costco are the masters at anchoring us on volume. Nobody needs that much ketchup at one time, or that much peanut butter. Or have you seen those cakes? My goodness, nobody needs that quantity or that volume at that time. Yet we happily push these carts out of Costco overflowing. They are the masters at this. And we're being anchored every day. We're being anchored at the grocery store. We're being anchored on the internet by our peers, by our bosses, by subordinates. We're being anchored every day. But what I love is that now you're going to see it. It's going to be very clear to you, and you're going to laugh at how often you used to fall for this, will continue to fall for it, and how others around you are falling for it. But now what I'm going to ask you to do with this awareness is to use it to drive deals in your favor. Okay, so cutting edge tool number 1 for this session is anchoring. And the sooner you try it, the sooner you'll be amazed at how easy and powerful this particular tool is, because it's just the way the human mind works. It's one of those human heuristics that we fall for consistently. All right, now I want to talk about something that is a complement to the anchor phenomenon, and when used with the anchoring phenomenon, really helps us drive outstanding outcomes. And this is called the pricing bias. And we're all really familiar with the pricing bias. And let me just give you a quick example. I want you to imagine that you're in the market for a diamond. You want a 1-carat round cut diamond. You go to the jeweler brings out 5 beautiful diamonds, but you notice that one of them is severely discounted. And I want you to think about what's the first thing that comes to your mind about this diamond. More than likely, what you're thinking is, what's wrong with it? Or there must be some flaw, right? Now, that's the pricing bias at work. I want you to imagine that there's another diamond in this lineup, but it's extremely expensive. And I want you to think, what's the first thing that comes to your mind about this diamond? Chances are you're thinking, it must be special. It must be better. It must be of higher quality. Maybe it's got better clarity, right? This is what the mind does when it's cued on price. And there was actually an interesting experiment that Professor Hilke Plasman, who is a very well-known neuroscientist, and they did this interesting experiment with wine. They had a single bottle of wine, and they poured 2 glasses, and they labeled one glass as coming from a $90 bottle of wine, and they labeled the other glass as coming from a $10 bottle of wine. It all came from the same bottle of wine, but then we had people test them. And those that were tasting that, what they thought was the $90 bottle of wine, actually had a rush of chemicals to the brain that signal reward. And then when they tasted the $10 bottle of wine, that rush didn't occur. It was much, much less. What this caused Professor Plassman to conclude was that not only did the brain think that because it was higher priced, it was better, it actually believed it. The brain actually believed that that was a better wine, even though it was the same wine as the $10, that was labeled the $10. Fascinating. And this even happens with pharmaceuticals. There's actually an effect where people actually, because of placebo effect, they actually do better on the brand name drug than on the generic if they understand there's a big pricing disparity. It's absolutely fascinating what the mind does. So essentially what pricing bias does for us is when we see a higher price, the brain actually believes it's related to higher value and higher quality. When we see a lower price, the brain actually believes it's associated with lower value and lower quality. What this means for us when we're trying to sell value is that we need to price our solutions higher, because this is the way the brain works if you want to sell value. But what it means for us when it comes to negotiation is that not only should we anchor and make the first offer, but we should anchor more aggressively than we normally would, because it gives that mind, that brain that's receiving it, that kick around, there's something more valuable about this offer. So when you combine the two, it becomes a pretty phenomenal 1-2 punch. And now, question number 3 for our poll. And I wish I was wearing PJs. All right, thank you all very much for that. Cutting edge tool is the pricing bias for today. So we've talked about anchoring, we've talked about the pricing bias, and when we combine these two when establishing an initial offer, you're going to actually have a 1-2 punch sort of driving this deal in your favor, and probably much better than you thought you could get. And this works consistently. These are 2 psychological tools, 2 human heuristics that you can count on. It's using them in a very conscious way that makes all the difference. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a little scenario to go through the next set of tools that I want to share with you for the rest of our session. And it's great if we can use sort of a case in order to do this, so you can see it in a real world context. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you're on the sell side of this negotiation that you're just about to begin, that you represent a company called Advanced Sales Performance. And what you do is you provide outsourced sales resources, like salespeople, for companies who either don't have time to build their own sales organization, or they simply don't know how. And so they come to you and you provide outside salespeople, inside salespeople, website and SEO capabilities to complete the revenue generating engine. All right, so you sell sales resources. You're in negotiations with a company called Digital Productions, and they provide audiovisual support for corporate events. And let's assume you've been in due diligence for some time. You understand the scope, Digital understands your capabilities, and you've both decided that you want to do a deal together as long as you can get the terms right. You feel like you're a great marriage, a great match, but you got to get the terms right. Now, if this deal falls apart, your alternative, your backup, your plan B is to go work on a deal with this company called Placement Inc. It's worth $1.2 million. And what we do is we try to look at if this deal falls apart, how do I make it up? What's the next thing I should be doing to recover? And you might have a lot of different alternatives, but this is your best alternative. We call it a BATNA, B-A-T-N-A, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. All right, their BATNA, or their best alternative, is that if this deal falls apart, they're going to go with our biggest competitor. They're called Selling Inc. But in order to do it, it's going to cost them $2 million to get this deal done. So that sort of sets up this negotiation. And oh, by the way, there's one other thing. The people that we're going to be negotiating with, they are ruthless. They're very difficult, and they squeeze their suppliers for everything they possibly can. So what can we do to ensure that we can still get a great outcome, even though we know this negotiation could be somewhat contentious? And here's what you have to do. You have to create 3 important boundaries for yourself. You need to know your reservation point, your target point, and your anchor point. Now, we talked about anchoring, and I'm going to actually show you the science around how it is you set an anchor. So I've told you, you really need to be the one that makes the first offer to anchor the negotiation, but I'm also going to show you how to do it, because therein is the magic. It's knowing how to anchor. But number 1 is also very important. Reservation point is simply negotiation speak for walk away. This is the point that if you hit it or go beyond it, you should walk away from the deal. And there's a lot of people that think they understand their walk away position, but unfortunately, it's usually too arbitrary. It's like we set our walk away here, and as soon as we hit it, it moves. So it wasn't our true walk away, and this is what gets us in trouble. Here's the walk away point. It is the point that if you hit it or go beyond it, you are now worse off by doing your deal than by not doing your deal. We need to know that point, that if you hit it or go beyond it, you're now worse off. That's called the reservation point. We're going to refer to it as an RP for the rest of the session. Now, how do we determine our RP? The first thing you have to do is know your BATNA. Well, remember what our BATNA was. It's placement incorporated. The way we turn our BATNA into a reservation point is we put a financial value on the deal. We have to put a valuation on it. And in our case, it's $1.2 million. And so we're going to put that on a line here. So our RP, your RP, is based on our BATNA of Placement Inc. with a valuation of $1.2 million. Now, we also use BATNA to help us determine how much power and leverage we have in our negotiation. What we do is what we call a power analysis before we go into any negotiation scenario. And what we do is we assess our BATNA. So we ask ourselves, and we have to be brutally honest, if we don't get this deal done, what is our alternative? And if you're sitting there going into the negotiation and you've got, 3 great alternatives to this company that you're trying to get a deal done with, then you have a tremendous amount of power and leverage going into that negotiation. And so you won't have to make as many concessions to get your deal done. Because if it doesn't go right, you have alternatives that you can go to get it done. However, if you're in a negotiation and you don't have a good BATNA, or you have no BATNA, you have no alternative, then your power is extremely low. You have no leverage or very little leverage at all. And that's when you need to address it. And many times I will tell my clients, push the deal off a bit until you can improve your BATNA. Go find an alternative so that you can improve your leverage in this negotiation. So that's how we measure power and leverage. That's one of the ways. Okay, so now back to the scenario. We now have determined that our walkaway, our RP, is $1.2 million. And what this means is that if Digital Productions makes us an offer of $1 million, take it or leave it, we should leave it because it's below our RP. And some people will ask me, is it really that cut and dry? Is it really mutually exclusive if it hits that point? Yes. Yes, we have to set a boundary for ourselves because you don't want to chase bad deals. Let them go and work on your alternative. Now, when we valued this deal, there's a number of ways to put a valuation on a deal. My favorite way is discounted cash flow. Now, some people like to use total contract value. I like discounted cash flow because it tells me when are all my costs going to hit over time? When are my revenues going to hit over time? If there's a gap between the two, I've got to float some capital. What's the cost of that? And then I can start plugging in things like lost time to market, opportunity cost, and then I can get a really good valuation of this deal in today's dollars, even though it may have a lot of other factors, including time involved. But there's a number of ways to do this. I'm just sharing my favorite is DCF. Now that we know our walkaway, the next thing we have to do is to determine the walkaway of the other party. And that is done by understanding their BATNA and putting a value on that. And we're just going to go through that as soon as we get our poll question done here. All right, thank you for participating in that. And we're going to go back to the scenario. And their RP was based on their BATNA of going to Selling Incorporated, which is our biggest competitor. And it's going to cost them $2 million. And the way we figured that out is we thought, okay, what's our best educated guess about how the other party's going to bid? How will Selling Inc., our competition, bid this deal? And we determined they might come in at $1.6 million. But then we have to do an apples to apples comparison. Well, what is Selling Inc. going to have to do to match our unique offer? And Selling Inc. doesn't offer inside salespeople. We do. Digital wants them. They don't offer website services. We do. Digital wants them. We start trying to determine, what cost is associated to add on to the 1.6 in order to match our offer. And it turns out it's going to take them $2 million. Now, the reason it's important for us to understand the other party's side of the equation as best we can, and we may not have good competitive data, so we have to make our best educated guess. But even best educated guesses are really, really good. We have now just determined our best educated guess on the walkaway position of the other party, and it's based on having an alternative with our competition. But what this is telling us is that if we think we're going to anchor at $2.5 million, what do you think they're going to do? Well, they're going to walk away. They're going to think you have no clue what this market will bear, and they'd be right. I mean, I call that zone way off to the far right of the 2 million, the buffoon zone, because that's exactly what's going to happen. You're going to look to them like you have no idea what you're doing. You're going to lose credibility instantly, and they're going to walk away from the deal. And it's hard to recover when you make a move like that. So I'm showing you where not to anchor, actually. And I'm also sharing you some game-changing information. And that is, I'm also showing you just how far you can push the other side before they snap and go somewhere else. But there's something else that we've now defined. It's called the zone of possible agreement. And what this tells us that anywhere in the blue space, there's the possibility of getting a deal done because it'll be better than either one of our alternatives. Anywhere outside of the blue, there's a very slim possibility that a deal can be done out there. This is your playing field, and you need to know your playing field. It's like you don't want to play football up in the stands or out of bounds. You want to be on the field. This is your field. But the blue space also represents your table stakes. So many negotiators go to the negotiating table without a clue what their table stakes are, which is very irresponsible. And in our case, if you just do the math here, the stakes in this deal is $800,000. You need to know that before you sit down at the negotiating table. And here's why. Most negotiators don't try or even think about assessing the walkaway of the other party. So the only number they have in their head is their own walkaway. And if our only key data number is our own walkaway, it's very easy to get anchored on our own RP. And this happens consistently. So let's say we're saying, okay, 1.2 million is our walk away. We've got to get north of 1.2. And then digital makes us an offer of 1.4 and we take it. What have we just done? We've just left $600,000 on the table. We should be fired because that's a horrible outcome. Who in their right mind would take the table stakes of only $200,000 when there's $800,000 at play? That's just bad business. But how would you know that unless you've done this simple exercise? So we have to know how much is there. And the other way to avoid anchoring ourselves on our own RP is to set a target. And when you set a target for yourself, you want it to be in the ZOPA, and you want two things to happen. You want a great financial outcome for this deal as your target, your outcome, and you want to get the majority of the table stakes. Might I say the lion's share of the table stakes. And so here's where we'll target at 1.8, and we're going to fight hard to end up there. But if our target of 1.8 is where we want to end up, where do we anchor? Right? Where do we start? And we've done a lot of research in this area, and we had a lot of hits and misses, but we found the place that works consistently, and it may surprise you. It is here, after the poll question. Thank you so much for your participation in that. Now, where are we going to anchor if we want to end up at 1.8? And this may surprise you, just beyond the other party's RP, just beyond. Why does this work? There's a few reasons. One, pricing bias. Remember, we talked about the pricing bias, how if you see something higher priced, you associate more value, right? It's more valuable. And so it's so close to their alternative offer that because it's slightly higher, the pricing bias is going to work. The second thing is they know they can get you down from there. And the big reason why they stick around is because it is so close to their next alternative that it's credible. And we have to maintain credibility throughout the negotiation. So this actually fascinating. This tends to work consistently. And now that we have an anchor position, that we know the highest likelihood the other party's going to stick around and negotiate, and they're going to still feel that you're credible, the space between the anchor and the target is called the concession pool. And this is how much you have to give away in your negotiation. And in our case, it's $300,000. And you need to know that too before you sit down at the negotiating table. And so now you have just sort of shifted some power and some confidence your way. There is nothing more empowering for a negotiator than walking into a negotiation, knowing your RP in the fog if you need it, that you've established a target where it'll be a great financial outcome and you'll get the majority of the table stakes. And you've anchored in such a way where the highest likelihood is the other party's going to stick around and negotiate, and you've got $300,000 to play with. That's powerful. And I would tell you that when I, myself, my team, or my clients, in every negotiation we've been in, not once have we come across another party that's done this. Fortune 50, all the way down and through to small business. Not one, and we get all the cues, right? They won't make the first offer. They don't have a plan on how concessions are going to go down. They don't understand their table stakes. We know they haven't done this, and this gives us an incredible competitive advantage when going into that negotiation. Cutting edge tool number 3 is to establish these boundaries. know the RPs, have a target point, and have a way to develop an anchor position, and then know how much you have to give away going in. Extremely powerful. All right, so what have we just done as I wrap up here? Well, not only have I shared with you some very powerful psychological tools, a process and a strategy for how to prepare, we've also created a common language that, imagine if people in your organization understood this to this degree, how it could really help the way that you coach those in your organization. For example, imagine talking to somebody who's doing a very significant deal and saying, hey, what was their RP? What was the other party's RP? How did you come up with that? What are the table stakes? Where did you establish the target and how did you do that? What was our walk away? Give me some rationale for your anchor position. What's in the concession pool and how far have you moved the needle toward target? Can you imagine? What we found is that companies that have this level of competency in this negotiation skill set grow. And I think you can see why. And as I end, there's this one bit of research I wanted to share with you. I started talking about it earlier. I had the opportunity to poll 1,500 CEOs, and I asked two questions in the poll. And the first question was the one I mentioned before. How important is it that your people are competent negotiators? Scale of 1 to 10. 1, not important that they're competent. 10, very important that they're competent. And the results was 8 and above, which basically says CEOs expect their people to be competent negotiators, bottom line. But then I asked a second question. How would you rank your people today in negotiating competency? Scale of 1 to 10. 1, not competent. 10, very competent. You might be surprised where this came out. 4 and below. This is telling. CEOs expect their people to be competent negotiators, but have determined that they're not. There's a gap. And the question is, what are you going to do to close the gap? Because companies that have competency in this area simply grow. I want to thank you all so very, very much for your time today. I hope you found this valuable. This is my contact information. If there's any way that I can assist you, just shoot me a note. I'm happy to help out. And I hope that all of you stay healthy and safe. And I just want to see if there are any questions that may have come in Q&A. And John, did anything come in?
No, that was great. And I love how you weave in Lionshare there all sneaky like. That was good. I was like, well played, man. I liked it. That was awesome. There was one question that came up that was in the typed into Zoom anyway, is just how truthful are people when you ask them what their budget is?
Yeah, and the answer to that question is not very.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, when you ask somebody what their budget is, bottom line is they're not going to give you their real budget. They're going to put some artificial budget number in front of you. And there's an interesting statistic as well. We measured, or there was some research that was done to determine how many people lie when they're negotiating. And I thought this was fascinating. It turns out that 68% of men lie at the negotiating table, which is crazy. But women are not off the hook. 64% of them lie at the negotiating table. And then you have to ask yourself, why do people lie? And some of the responses we get are they're trying to find some way to get an advantage over the other party. And they feel that lying helps them do that, which is fascinating.
No, I as a speaker and a consultant, there are some people that I think they just get excited by negotiating. Like they just want to, like, they always have to get the last word. And that's where having that walk away, like, you know what, I'm just not going to do it. It's like, and then that's when they call you. It's not over email anymore. They're, hey, hold on. Like, it's like, well, I mean, I'm not jerking around here. Like, either you want to do it or you don't. Like, this isn't a game for me, like,
right.
And so, but that was
it's
really
not
great.
A game. It's a very serious thing, right? Deal making is a very serious thing. It is not a game, for sure.
No, I loved it. And I loved how you walked it through, and that was really helpful. So thank you so much, Joe. I don't think that there's any other questions. If you have any, oh, there is one more. Do you think these strategies apply to both business deals and personal deals, like buying a car, things like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely, they do. Now, the more complex, the better this process applies, right? So if it's a really low stakes deal, that doesn't really require much negotiation. That's not so much negotiating, that's haggling. And I
Right.
differentiate
Okay.
between the two. So when you're haggling, that occurs when the stakes are low. Like, can I get $1,500 off MSRP on a car, or right, or $2,500?
Yeah.
It's low stakes, right? The
Right.
impact financially is not massive. And the other thing is, haggling occurs when you don't need a relationship with the other party after the deal is done. So if you don't need a relationship and the stakes are low, have a ball. I mean, this is just, it's a game of wits and who's the biggest jerk or whatever,
Right.
right?
Right.
But alternatively, if the stakes are high, right? If the financial impact is substantial and you need a relationship after the fact, this is when you have to deploy negotiation strategies. And yes, it does work on personal negotiations as well as business
Yeah.
negotiations.
Oh, I love that. That's a great, I just, in the matrix, I guess in my brain, it's the high stakes, low dollars, whatever,
Mhm.
type of thing. Yeah. And I love that. Have a ball, like go nuts. Yeah. Whatever. Who cares? You can walk away. There's a
Right.
dealership down the street. Doesn't matter. Like
That's right.
that's,
Exactly right.
that's funny. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, Joe. We're